At 8 years old, his world fell apart. By 18, the football world told him he wasn't good enough to play his position. But he never listened. He just kept running. This is the raw, unfiltered story of how Lamar Jackson overcame tragedy to become one of the most electrifying players the game has ever seen. In April of 2023, Lamar Jackson signed a 5-year, $260 million contract, a deal that made him the highest paid player in the history of the National Football League. It was a moment of incredible, generation-altering triumph, the ultimate validation for a player who had bet on himself at every turn. But to understand the true weight of that moment, the unshakable self-belief that allowed him to reach that peak, you have to go back to a single, devastating day in 2005. A day when an 8-year-old boy from Pompano Beach, Florida, lost everything. It was a world of instability, a neighborhood where the dangers of drug activity and violence were a constant and unavoidable presence. He has described it as a place where you either play football or you were a statistic. This was not a place for a long childhood. It was a place that forced kids to grow up fast, to learn to navigate a world that was often unforgiving. For a young Lamar, that process of growing up was brutally and suddenly accelerated. When he was just 8 years old, his father, Lamar Jackson Sr., died unexpectedly of a heart attack at the age of 31. In a cruel and almost unbelievable twist of fate, on the very same day, his grandmother also passed away. In the span of a few hours, his world was shattered. The double tragedy left his mother, Felicia Jones, completely alone to raise 4 young children in a dangerous environment. But in that moment of unimaginable grief, Felicia made a choice. She would not let her family fall apart. She would become their rock, their protector, their guide, and their shield. And for her oldest son, who now carried his father's name, she would become his first and only coach. Felicia Jones is a central figure in the Lamar Jackson story. She was a force of nature, a mother who saw the immense and unique talent in her son and was determined to protect it from the chaos that surrounded them. She kept Lamar and his siblings on a strict and disciplined schedule. They were not allowed to be outside after dark. Their lives were a structured routine of school, homework, and sports, a protective bubble she created to shield them from the negative influences of the neighborhood, and she was his first football coach. She wasn't just a supportive mom on the sidelines, she was a demanding, hands-on teacher of the game. She was famously tough, pushing Lamar and his younger brother to be better, to be stronger, to outwork everyone. She designed their training drills herself, drills that were as unique as her son's future playing style. One of her most famous methods was having the boys practice throwing a football over the roof of their one-story house, a drill designed to perfect their throwing art, to teach them to put touch on the ball, a skill that would one day make them a great deep ball passer. She made them wear full football pads, not just during practice, but around the neighborhood, just to get used to the weight and the discomfort. It was a way to build physical and mental toughness, to ensure that when they finally got on the field for a real game, it would feel easy. This was the strange duality of Lamar's childhood. He was a kid with a loving, dedicated mother who was pushing him to be great, but it was all set against a backdrop of poverty and constant danger. While the term homeless might not have meant living in a car, it represented the instability and insecurity of his environment, a feeling that a safe home was never truly guaranteed. He has spoken about friends and family members who were lost to the violence of the streets, a constant and painful reminder of the stakes. His one true escape, his one guaranteed path out was the football field. In that field, he was a prodigy. He was faster, more elusive, and more creative than any other kid. He had a natural, almost magical ability to make defenders miss, a fluid, joyful style of play that was impossible to teach. But even then, even as a young kid dominating Pop Warner football, he was fighting against a perception that would follow him for his entire career. He was a phenomenal athlete, but was he a real quarterback? His mother never doubted it for a second. She was his fiercest defender, his biggest believer, and his first manager. She knew what he was capable of, even when the rest of the world couldn't see it yet. The foundation of his incredible self-belief, the unshakable confidence that would allow him to bet on himself again and again, was forged in those early years. It was a bond between a mother and a son who had faced the worst together and were determined to build a new future, one throw and one electrifying run at a time. That fire forged in tragedy was about to be unleashed on the fields of South Florida. The world was about to see a once-in-a-generation athlete, but he was determined to prove he was something more. At Boynton Beach High School, Lamar Jackson was a legend. He was a human highlight reel, a real-life video game cheat code who played the quarterback position in a way that no one had ever seen before. He had a cannon for an arm, but it was his electrifying speed and otherworldly agility that made him a nightmare for opposing defenses. In his 2 years as a team starter, he was an unstoppable force, throwing for over 2,000 yards, running for over 1,600, and accounting for an incredible 53 total touchdowns. He was, by any measure, one of the most exciting and dominant high school players in the entire country. But the world of big-time college football recruiting didn't see it that way. Despite his incredible production, Lamar was an overlooked and controversial prospect. Most major college programs and recruiting services saw his unique run-first style not as a strength, but as a flaw. They didn't see a quarterback. They saw an athlete. This label, often applied to black quarterbacks with exceptional running ability, was a backhanded compliment, a coded way of saying they didn't believe he had the intelligence or the passing mechanics to play the position at the highest level. Powerhouse schools like Florida State, Auburn, and the University of Florida all recruited him, but they wanted him to switch positions. They wanted him to play wide receiver or defensive back, where they could utilize his athleticism. But Lamar, backed by his mother Felicia, was unwavering. He was a quarterback, period. He turned down offers from some of the biggest programs in the country because they refused to give him a legitimate chance to play under center. The path out of Pompano Beach was proving to be much harder than he had imagined. The very thing that made him special was the same thing that was holding him back. But one coach saw his potential. Bobby Petrino, the head coach of the University of Louisville, saw a revolutionary talent. He was one of the few Powerhouse 5 coaches who not only promised Lamar he could play quarterback, but was excited to build an offense around his unique skills. It was the opportunity he had been waiting for. As a true freshman at Louisville, he showed flashes of that incredible talent. He capped his first season by being named the MVP of the Music City Bowl, a game in which he put on a stunning performance, throwing for 2 touchdowns and running for a bowl record 226 yards and 2 more touchdowns. It was a sign of things to come. But no one could have predicted what would happen next. His sophomore season in 2016 was one of the most electrifying and dominant seasons in the history of college football. He burst on the national scene in a game against Syracuse. On one now legendary play, he took off on a run, and as a defender went low to tackle him, Lamar famously hurdled clean over the top of him without breaking stride on his way to the end zone. The play went viral. It was the perfect visual representation of his unique, unstoppable talent. The Lamar Jackson hype train had officially left the station. A few weeks later, he cemented his status as the best player in the country in a showdown against the number 2 ranked Florida State Seminoles. In a nationally televised game, he put on a masterclass, accounting for 5 total touchdowns in a dominant 63-20 blowout victory. By the end of the year, his stats were breathtaking. He had thrown for over 3,500 yards and 30 touchdowns, and rushed for over 1,500 yards and 21 more touchdowns. He had accounted for 51 total scores. On December 10, 2016, at just 19 years old, Lamar Jackson became the youngest player to ever win the Heisman Trophy. He had reached the top of the college football world. The kid from Pompano, the athlete that no one wanted as quarterback, was now officially the best player in the entire sport. He had proven the college world wrong, but as he prepared for the NFL draft, he discovered that the old doubts hadn't disappeared. They had just gotten louder. After winning the Heisman Trophy, Lamar Jackson had done everything a quarterback could do to prove he belonged at the highest level. But as he entered the 2018 NFL draft process, the narrative that had followed him his whole life came roaring back. He wasn't a real quarterback, he was an athlete, he was a running back. The criticism was relentless and came from some of the most respected voices in the sport. The most famous and damaging critique came from Hall of Fame general manager Bill Polian, who said on ESPN that Lamar was too short and slight and should switch to wide receiver in the NFL. It was a stunningly dismissive comment about a player who had just been the most dominant quarterback in college football for 2 straight seasons. But it was a sentiment shared by many old school scouts and executives in the league. They saw his electrifying running ability not as a weapon, but as a crutch, a sign that he couldn't win from the pocket. Faced with this wall of doubt, Lamar made a high-stakes gamble. He decided to fight back. At the NFL Scouting Combine, he made a shocking and defiant choice. He refused to run the 40-yard dash. For a player whose speed was considered his greatest asset, this was a bold and controversial move. But his reasoning was simple and powerful. I'm a quarterback. He wanted to be judged on his arm, on his mind, and on his game film, not on a track time that would only fuel the narrative that he should be playing a different position. He was betting on himself again. On the night of the 2018 NFL Draft, it looked like that bet had failed. Lamar sat in the green room, dressed in a now iconic Gucci suit, waiting for his name to be called, and he waited and waited. The first quarterback went off the board, then the second, then the third. Then, in a shocking move, a fourth quarterback, Josh Rosen, was taken in the top 10. The cameras kept cutting back to Lamar, capturing the long, public, and humiliating wait. Team after team, 31 picks in a row, passed on the Heisman Trophy winner. The old doubts, it seemed, had won. But one legendary football mind saw what the others had missed. Ozzie Newsome, the Hall of Fame general manager of the Baltimore Ravens, was in his final draft, and he saw a revolutionary talent, a game-changing weapon that everyone else was too afraid to touch. With the final pick of the first round approaching, Newsome made a move. He traded back into the first round with the Philadelphia Eagles to secure the 32nd and final pick. With that pick, the long wait was finally over. The Baltimore Ravens selected Lamar Jackson. He made it to the first round, but just barely. He was now a member of a team that already had a Super Bowl winning veteran quarterback in Joe Flacco. The fight to prove he was a real quarterback was far from over. He began his rookie season as the backup, holding a clipboard on the sidelines. But midway through the season, Flacco suffered an injury, and the door was finally open. Lamar took over as the starter, and with his electrifying style, led the Ravens on a 6-1 run to an improbable playoff berth. But the season ended in another moment of public humiliation. In a home playoff game against the Los Angeles Chargers, Lamar looked completely lost. The Chargers' defense was designed to stop him, and it worked. He struggled mightily to pass the ball, and the Ravens' offense was shut down. The home crowd turned on him, with chants for the bench Joe Flacco raining down from the stands. The Ravens lost, and the old narrative came roaring back. See? This style can't win in the playoffs. He's a gimmick. He's not a real quarterback. The critics were louder than ever, convinced they had finally been proven right. They had no idea they were just giving him the only thing he needed, more fuel for the fire, and he was about to burn the entire league to the ground. The offseason following that humiliating playoff loss was a moment of reckoning for the Baltimore Ravens. They had a choice. They could try to force their young, electrifying quarterback to become something he wasn't, a traditional pocket-passing quarterback, or they could do something revolutionary. They could tear up their old playbook and build a new one, an offense designed not to change Lamar Jackson, but to unleash him. They chose to unleash him. Offensive coordinator Greg Roman, a brilliant and creative offensive mind, spent the entire offseason redesigning the team's entire philosophy. He built an offense that looked more like something from a video game than a traditional NFL scheme. It was a complex system of run-pass options, misdirections, and a punishing run game that used Lamar's generational speed as its ultimate weapon. The Ravens weren't just tolerating their quarterback's unique talent, they were betting their entire franchise on it. And in the 2019 season, that bet paid off in one of the most spectacular and dominant seasons the NFL had ever seen. From week one, it was clear that this was a new Lamar Jackson and a new Baltimore Ravens. He was not just a runner, he was a complete quarterback. He was more confident, more decisive, and his passing was on another level. He was throwing with an accuracy and touch that the critics said he would never possess. The Ravens didn't just win, they destroyed teams. The 2019 season was a masterpiece, a weekly highlight reel of impossible plays. There was the legendary 47-yard touchdown run against the Cincinnati Bengals, where he used a devastating spin move that left two defenders grabbing at air. There was the Monday Night Football game against the undefeated New England Patriots, where he outdueled the legendary Tom Brady, handing the champs their first loss of the season. And there was the other Monday night game against the Los Angeles Rams, where he was so perfect, so completely in control that he threw for 5 touchdowns and sat out the entire fourth quarter. By the end of the year, his numbers were breathtaking, a perfect blend of passing and rushing dominance that the league had never seen before. He led the entire NFL with 36 passing touchdowns, proving to every critic that he was an elite passer, and on the ground, he was a revolutionary force, shattering Michael Vick's single-season rushing record for a quarterback with an incredible 1,206 rushing yards. He led the Ravens to a 14-2 record, the best in the entire NFL. He was the undisputed best player in the sport. And at the end of the season, the vindication was official and historic. Lamar Jackson was named the NFL's most valuable player. The vote was unanimous, making him only the second player in the history of the league after Tom Brady to receive that honor. It was the ultimate answer to every doubt he'd ever faced. The kid from Pompano that they called an athlete, the Heisman winner they told to switch positions, the first-round pick who was left waiting in the green room. He had just been unanimously crowned the best player in the world. But his journey of betting on himself was not over. A few years later, after winning his second MVP award, he faced one final test, securing a long-term contract. And once again, he did it his way. He refused to hire a traditional agent, choosing to negotiate for himself with the help of his mother Felicia. The public negotiations were long and difficult, and once again he was criticized for his unconventional approach. But in the end, he won. In April of 2023, he signed a massive 5-year, $260 million contract extension, a deal that at the time made him the highest paid player in the history of the NFL. The kid who grew up in poverty, who was raised by a single mother who coached him by having him throw a football over their house, was now the richest player in the sport. His legacy is now secure. He is a 2-time MVP, a revolutionary talent who has shattered every stereotype about what a quarterback can be. His story is the ultimate lesson in self-belief, a powerful testament to a young man who at every stage of his career faced a wall of doubt and chose to bet on himself, over and over again. He turned every doubt into fuel. His journey from an overlooked prospect to a 2-time MVP is a raw, unfiltered story of redemption. It's proof that you should never let anyone else define what you can be. Who is another player with a story that needs to be told? Sound off in the comments. If you want to see our next investigation, hit that subscribe button.